Hey, Victor, Juliana's voice carried from the kitchen, cutting through the serene hum of the evening. Can you grab the wine from the cellar? Dinner's almost ready. Victor looked up from his bourbon, his eyes lingering on the mantel. The framed photo from last summer's family reunion caught his attention. Marcus was in the center, flanked by him and Juliana, all grinning like they didn't have a care in the world. A warmth filled his chest as he remembered that day. Marcus had been his wild, carefree younger brother, the kind of guy who always needed guidance, but never hesitated to bring laughter into a room. Sure, love. Smells amazing in here. Victor placed a glass on the side table, stood and stretched. The faint aroma of garlic and herbs wafted from the kitchen. Juliana's cooking had always been one of her charms. He smiled, brushing off an odd sense of unease. Descending into the cellar, Victor felt the cool air wrap around him. His hand brushed against the light switch, and a low hum illuminated rows of bottles. He reached for a bottle of red, but his attention wavered when he heard a faint buzzing upstairs. Shrugging it off, Victor climbed back up, cradling the wine bottle. As he entered the kitchen, his phone, left on the counter, lit up. A series of messages popped onto the screen. Juliana was plating the food. That took long enough, she teased, not even looking at him. Dinner will be cold if you keep getting distracted. Victor chuckled, setting the wine on the table. Just making sure I grabbed the right one. He picked up his phone to check the notifications. His brow furrowed. The texts were from an unfamiliar number. Can't wait for tonight. Make an excuse to get rid of him. Last night was incredible. Same time, Victor's stomach knotted as he reread the words. His heart thudded loudly in his chest. The room seemed to close in around him. Who's texting you this late? Juliana asked casually, her back still turned. She was transferring mashed potatoes into a serving bowl, her movements relaxed and practiced. Victor's mouth went dry. He pocketed the phone and forced a calm tone. Just some spam. You know how it is. She glanced at him over her shoulder, her expression unreadable, and then returned to the task at hand. Spam sure has gotten bold if they're sending messages at dinner time. Victor managed a weak laugh. Right? The nerve. Dinner was served, and they sat across from each other at the dining table. The table was meticulously set, just like Juliana liked it. She poured wine into their glasses and raised hers with a smile. To us, 10 years strong. To us, Victor echoed, his voice less spirited than usual. As Juliana launched into a story about her day at work, Victor found himself staring at her. She was as beautiful as the day they'd met, her long hair cascading over her shoulders, her laughter infectious. Yet now, it felt like he was looking at a stranger. His mind was racing. He thought about the texts. Can't wait for tonight. They couldn't mean what they seemed to mean. Could they? Earth to Victor, Juliana said, snapping him back to the present. You're miles away. Everything okay? He blinked, forcing a smile. Yes, sorry. Just thinking about something at work. She frowned slightly. Work? I thought you said you'd leave it at the office tonight. I know, he said, picking at his food. Just hard to switch it off sometimes. Juliana nodded, her concern melting into understanding. Well, you need to relax. That's what this is for, a good meal, a glass of wine, and some time with your wife. Let me help you unwind later. She winked, her tone light. Victor forced a chuckle. Sounds perfect, but nothing about this evening felt perfect. After dinner, Juliana went upstairs, claiming she needed a quick shower before their relaxing evening could begin. Victor stayed behind, pretending to clean up the dishes. As soon as she was out of earshot, he pulled out his phone and reread the texts. His instincts screamed at him to dig deeper. He hesitated, then navigated to their shared phone account online. The list of calls and texts was overwhelming, but one number stood out, a series of frequent exchanges with the same unfamiliar number that had sent the messages. His breath quickened. The sound of running water from the shower above gave him a sense of urgency. Victor opened the messaging app, copying the unknown number into a search engine. A chill ran down his spine when the results came up. It was Marcus's number. The wine glass in his hand shattered as it slipped to the floor. Later that night, Victor lay beside Juliana in bed, staring at the ceiling. She was already asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. His mind churned with questions and emotions, anger, betrayal, confusion. He didn't sleep at all. Instead, he replayed the memories, looking for signs he might have missed. Had Marcus's visits become more frequent lately? Had Juliana been acting differently? Or had he simply been too blind to see what was right in front of him? When dawn broke, Victor got up quietly, careful not to wake Juliana. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, staring out at the empty street. He knew one thing. He needed answers, and he needed proof. Next day, the doorbell rang just as Victor was setting the table. He frowned. They weren't expecting anyone. "I'll get it," Juliana said, wiping her hands on a towel. She practically skipped to the door, her voice cheerful. "Marcus, what a surprise." Victor straightened, his hands still on a stack of plates. "Marcus?" Marcus strolled in, his grin wide and easy. "Couldn't stay away, sis." Smelled the food from across town. Victor walked toward the foyer, his expression neutral. "Marcus, didn't know you'd be joining us." "Spur of the moment thing," Marcus said, throwing an arm around Juliana's shoulders. "You know me, always keeping things interesting." Juliana laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I told him he's always welcome. Right, Victor?" Victor hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course." The three moved to the dining room, where the table was already set. Marcus plopped into a chair, helping himself to a glass of water. "Smells amazing in here, Juliana. You outdid yourself." "Thanks," she said, beaming. "It's just a simple roast, nothing fancy." Victor slid into his seat at the head of the table, watching them closely. There was something in the way they exchanged glances, too familiar, too comfortable. "So, Marcus," Victor began, keeping his tone light, "what brings you here tonight? Thought you'd be busy with your own plans." Marcus smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Just miss my big brother and my favorite sister-in-law." "Is that a crime?" Juliana chimed in, her voice a little too cheerful. "You know how Marcus is, always popping in at the right moment." Victor forced a tight smile. "Always." Dinner was a strange affair. The food was delicious, but Victor hardly tasted it. His attention kept shifting between Juliana and Marcus. Their laughter was too easy, their shared stories filled with unnecessary detail. Marcus regaled them with tales of his latest escapades, most of them borderline ridiculous. And then, Marcus said, slapping the table as he laughed, "The guy actually thought I was the instructor. Can you believe it?" Juliana giggled, her eyes sparkling. "That's so you, Marcus. Always finding yourself in the strangest situations." Victor pushed his fork around his plate, his appetite fading. "Must be exhausting, living such an unpredictable life." Marcus grinned. "Keeps me on my toes." "Speaking of toes, Juliana, remember that trip to Marcus?" Juliana cut him off, her face flushing. "Don't embarrass me in front of Victor." Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. I'll save that one for another time." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Save what?" Juliana waved a dismissive hand. "Just one of Marcus's silly stories. You know how he is?" Victor nodded slowly. "I do." After dinner, they moved to the living room. Juliana brought out a bottle of wine, pouring glasses for herself and Marcus. Victor declined, opting to nurse a glass of bourbon instead. Marcus sprawled on the couch, his body language relaxed. Juliana sat on the armrest beside him, her legs crossed, her body angled toward him. Victor settled into the recliner across the room, his expression unreadable. "You know," Marcus said, swirling his wine, "you've got a pretty great setup here, Victor. Beautiful wife, cozy home. It's like a picture-perfect life." Victor's grip tightened on his glass. "Took a lot of work to build it." Juliana smiled, her tone playful. "And a lot of patience, right? I mean, you've had to put up with me for 10 years. Marcus chuckled. "Patience is one thing. Persistence is another. You got both, bro." Victor's gaze flicked between them. Persistence pays off. The conversation meandered after that, but Victor felt like an outsider in his own home. Marcus dominated the discussion, and Juliana hung on his every word. By the time Marcus stood to leave, Victor's head was spinning. "Well," Marcus said, stretching, "this has been fun. Thanks for the meal, Juliana." You're a lifesaver. Anytime, she said, walking him to the door. You know you're always welcome. Victor followed, his expression neutral. Drive safe, Marcus. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. Always do. See you soon, big guy. The door closed with a soft click, and Juliana turned to Victor, her smile still in place. Well, that was nice, wasn't it? I think he's lonely. Victor tilted his head. He doesn't seem lonely. In fact, he seems comfortable. Juliana's brow furrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, Victor said quickly, shaking his head. Just an observation. She stared at him for a moment longer, then shrugged. I'm going to bed. Coming. In a bit, he said. I'll clean up first. Victor stayed downstairs long after Juliana had gone to bed. He replayed the evening in his mind, dissecting every glance, every word. The casual touches, the way Marcus had dominated the evening, the subtle hints that didn't seem like coincidences. Finally, he turned off the lights and climbed the stairs. Juliana was already asleep, her breathing steady. Victor slid into bed beside her, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. If he was going to find out what, he needed to be patient. The truth would come to light, one way or another. The days that followed Marcus's visit felt like walking on shattered glass. Victor found himself scrutinizing everything Juliana did. Her behavior, once endearing, now felt suspicious. It started with her late-night errands. Juliana had always been a homebody, preferring cozy nights with a book over spontaneous outings. But suddenly, she was going out several evenings a week, claiming she needed me time. What errands are you running this late? Victor asked casually one evening as she slipped on her coat. Just the usual, she replied without meeting his eyes. Groceries, pharmacy, you know how it is? He nodded slowly, watching her closely. Want me to come with you? I could use a change of scenery. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. No, it's fine. You should relax. I won't be long. Victor forced a smile. All right. Drive safe. She left quickly, her pace brisk. As soon as the door clicked shut, Victor was on his feet. He peered through the window, watching her car pull out of the driveway. Instead of heading toward the main road, she turned down the side street, away from the grocery store or pharmacy. Juliana's behavior wasn't the only thing gnawing at him. He'd noticed the hush phone calls, too. She would step into another room, her voice low and cheerful. Who was that? Victor asked one afternoon when she came back into the living room, tucking her phone into her pocket. Oh, just Mia, she said, referencing her coworker. She's going through some stuff. I'm just being a good friend. Victor nodded, but didn't press further. His instinct told him something was off, but he needed proof. The breaking point came one night when Juliana was fast asleep beside him. Victor was jolted awake by her murmuring. Marcus, she sighed, a faint smile on her lips. Victor froze, his breath catching in his throat. He stared at her, the words replaying in his mind like a broken record. Marcus. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake, her face serene. Victor lay back on his pillow, his mind racing. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. The next morning, Victor decided to take action. He spent the afternoon researching discreet surveillance equipment, then drove to a local electronics store to make his purchase. At home, he installed hidden cameras in strategic locations, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and another in their bedroom. He felt a pang of guilt as he screwed the last device into place, but it was fleeting. If I'm wrong, he muttered to himself, I'll apologize. But if I'm right, he left the cameras running, the weight of his suspicions pressing heavily on his chest. Days passed, and Victor monitored the footage every night after Juliana went to bed. The first few recordings revealed nothing unusual, just mundane moments of Juliana cooking, cleaning, and lounging on the couch. Then, on the fourth day, he found what he was looking for. The footage started innocently enough. Juliana was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. A knock at the door pulled her attention, and she jumped up to answer it. Victor's stomach clenched when Marcus walked in. He watched in silence as Juliana greeted his brother with a hug that lingered too long. They sat on the couch, their voices low, but their body language unmistakable. Marcus leaned in, whispering something that made Juliana laugh. And then they kissed. Victor's hands clenched into fists as the betrayal unfolded on screen. Marcus pulled Juliana onto his lap, and their laughter turned into hushed murmurs, their movements growing intimate. Victor paused the footage, his chest heaving. The next morning, Victor sat at the kitchen table, his coffee untouched. Juliana walked in, her face glowing as she hummed a tune. "Good morning," she said brightly, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Victor nodded stiffly. "Morning." She didn't seem to notice his tone. "What's the plan for today? Anything exciting?" Victor forced a smile. "Just the usual." "You." "Yoga class later," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. He almost laughed at the audacity. "Yoga class, huh? Sounds relaxing." "It is," she said, completely oblivious. Victor bit his tongue, suppressing the urge to confront her then and there. He needed to be strategic. If he acted too soon, they could twist the narrative, deny the evidence, or make him look paranoid. Later that night, as Juliana slept peacefully, Victor replayed the footage. This time, he didn't stop at the kiss. He forced himself to watch it all: the laughter, the whispered conspiracies, and the physical betrayal. It was a twisted film starring the two people he trusted most. When the screen went dark, Victor sat in silence. The rage he'd felt earlier had simmered into something colder, sharper. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a challenge. And Victor wasn't about to lose. Victor spent the next week preparing his plan, each step calculated for maximum impact. He couldn't let his anger cloud his judgment. This wasn't about an emotional outburst. It was about exposing the truth and reclaiming his dignity. He began by sending out invitations to a special anniversary dinner for their families. Both Juliana and Marcus received their invites alongside the rest of the family, ensuring they wouldn't suspect anything unusual. "Wow, Victor," Juliana said, reading her invitation with a smile. "You've really gone all out this time. A big family dinner for our anniversary? I didn't know you were such a romantic." Victor smiled back, his face calm. 18 years is a milestone. I thought it deserved a celebration." Juliana kissed him on the cheek. "You're the best. I'll start planning the menu." "Don't worry about it," Victor replied. "I've got everything under control." She looked surprised but pleased. "Well, aren't you full of surprises?" Victor nodded, his smile unwavering. "You have no idea." The day of the dinner arrived, and the house was buzzing with activity. Victor had hired a catering service to handle the food, allowing him to focus on setting the stage. He ensured every detail was perfect, from the floral arrangements to the seating chart. Juliana, radiant in a red dress, flitted around the room, greeting guests and playing the gracious hostess. Victor watched her, his expression inscrutable. "You've outdone yourself, Victor," Juliana said, brushing past him. "Everything looks amazing." "Thank you," he said. "It's a special night." Marcus arrived fashionably late, as he always did. He strolled in with his signature grin, exuding an air of casual charm. "Sorry, traffic was a nightmare," he said, clapping Victor on the back. "No problem," Victor replied, his tone friendly. "You're just in time." The dining room buzzed with chatter as everyone settled in. Victor sat at the head of the table, with Juliana to his right and Marcus to her right. Plates clinked and glasses clattered as the family enjoyed the lavish spread. Juliana raised her glass, her smile glowing. "Before we dig into dessert, I'd like to propose a toast. Victor, these 10 years have been wonderful. You're my rock, my partner, my everything. Here's to many more years of happiness together." The table erupted in applause, and Victor forced a smile. "Thank you, Juliana. That means a lot." He stood, his glass in hand. "If I may, I'd like to add to that. Here's to loyalty, trust, and most importantly, the truth." Juliana's smile faltered slightly, her brow furrowing. "Of course. Those are the foundations of a good marriage." Victor nodded. "Exactly. And tonight, I'd like to share something with all of you." He pulled out his phone, holding it up for everyone to see. With a single tap, the living room TV flickered to life. The room fell silent as the screen displayed a video. The footage began innocently enough, showing Marcus entering the house and greeting Juliana. But as the moments played out, the mood in the room shifted. The hugs lingered too long, the whispers too intimate. Then came the kiss, the laughter, the betrayal laid bare. Gasps echoed around the table. Juliana's face turned ashen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Victor," she stammered, "what is this? Where did you get this?" Marcus shot to his feet, his face red. "What the hell, man? This is out of context." "Out of context?" Victor's voice was cold, his eyes locked on Marcus. "What part of this is out of context? The part where you kissed my wife, or the part where you planned your next rendezvous?" The room erupted into chaos. Juliana grabbed Victor's arm, her eyes pleading. "Victor, please let me explain. It's not what it looks like." Victor yanked his arm away, his voice cutting through the noise. "It's exactly what it looks like, Juliana. Don't insult everyone's intelligence by pretending otherwise." Marcus tried to step in, his tone defensive. "Look, Victor, I know this looks bad, but—" Victor rounded on him, his fury barely contained. "Looks bad? You think betraying your own brother is just a bad look? You've crossed every line, Marcus." Their parents, seated near the center of the table, looked horrified. Victor's father spoke first, his voice trembling. "Marcus, is this true? How could you do something like this?" Marcus stammered, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the evidence. It just happened, okay? I didn't mean for it to go this far." Juliana collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face. "Victor, I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Please forgive me." Victor's gaze was icy. "You didn't make a mistake, Juliana. A mistake is forgetting our anniversary or burning dinner. This was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to betray me." Juliana sobbed, her hands clutching at his. "I'll do anything to make this right. Please, Victor, don't do this to us." Victor pulled his hands away, his expression resolute. "There is no us anymore." Juliana's face drained of color. Her hand shot to her mouth, trembling. Marcus froze, his confident grin replaced by wide-eyed panic. "Victor," Juliana's voice cracked. "I can explain." Victor stood from his seat, his expression cold. He raised a hand, silencing her. "Explain what, Juliana? That the man I trusted most, my own brother, is the one you've been sneaking around with? That the woman I devoted 10 years of my life to thought it was fine to humiliate me under my own roof?" The room was thick with tension, every eye on the trio at the center of the storm. "Victor, please," Juliana begged, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's not what you think." Victor barked a bitter laugh. "Not what I think. Do you really expect me to believe this was some kind of misunderstanding? I watched you. I heard you." He gestured to the screen, where the incriminating footage had mercifully paused. "Don't insult my intelligence." Marcus, ever the charmer, attempted to step in. "Look, Victor," he began, standing cautiously. "I get it. You're hurt. But we didn't mean for you to find out like this." Victor's fist shot out before Marcus could finish, connecting with his jaw. The impact was immediate and brutal. Marcus stumbled backward, crashing into the table. Plates and glasses shattered on the floor, amplifying the chaos. The room erupted. "Victor, stop!" Juliana screamed, rushing to Marcus, who was sprawled on the ground, clutching his face. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth as he glared up at Victor, his bravado completely shattered. "Don't you dare play the victim," Victor growled, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Both of you." Marcus scrambled to his feet, his hands raised defensively. "Look, I made a mistake, okay? I didn't mean for it to get this far." Victor's laugh was cold and mirthless. "A mistake? A mistake is spilling coffee, Marcus. Sleeping with your brother's wife? That's a choice. A calculated, deliberate choice." The tension in the room was unbearable. Victor's father, a stoic man who rarely raised his voice, finally spoke. "Marcus," he said, his tone low and shaking with anger, "is this true?" Marcus looked at the floor, his shoulders slumped. "Dad, answer me," their father thundered, slamming his fist on the table. "Yes," Marcus mumbled, barely audible. Their mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "How could you do this? To your own brother?" Marcus didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the floor. Juliana turned to Victor, her tear-streaked face desperate. "Victor, please listen to me. I love you. I've always loved you. This was a terrible mistake, but it doesn't mean I don't care about you. Please, we can fix this. Fix this? Victor's voice was icy, cutting through her pleas like a blade. You don't fix a shattered trust, Juliana. You don't repair a marriage when the foundation is gone. And don't you dare talk to me about love. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. She reached out to him, but he stepped back, his gaze unwavering. Victor, please, she sobbed. Don't throw away everything we've built together. You already threw it away, he replied, his voice calm but firm. I'm just making it official. The remaining guests looked on in horrified silence. Victor's mother stood and approached him hesitantly. Victor, she said softly, let's all calm down and talk this through. This doesn't have to end like this. Victor shook his head. Mom, with all due respect, this is between me, Juliana, and Marcus. I appreciate everyone being here tonight, but this was the point of inviting you all. I wanted you to see the truth. Turning to the room, he continued, for too long, I've put up with lies and deceit. No more. Everyone here deserves to know what's really been going on. He gestured to the screen, which still displayed the damning image of Juliana and Marcus locked in an embrace. This is who they are, and now they'll live with the consequences. Marcus, sensing the tide had completely turned against him, mumbled something under his breath and made for the door. I'm out of here, he muttered, blood still trickling from his split lip. Good, Victor said. Don't come back. Juliana turned to follow Marcus, her desperation palpable. Wait, Marcus, don't go. Victor's voice stopped her cold. You're not going anywhere, Juliana. This is your mess to face, not his escape plan. She froze, looking between Victor and Marcus, as though unsure who to beg for help. Finally, she crumpled into a chair, her sobs filling the silence. As the last of the guests trickled out, murmuring their awkward goodbyes, Victor remained by the door, watching them leave. His father paused on his way out, placing a firm hand on Victor's shoulder. Son, he said, his voice heavy with sadness, I'm sorry this happened. You didn't deserve any of it. Victor nodded, his jaw tight. Thanks, Dad. I'll be okay. His mother approached him, her face etched with concern. Victor, are you okay? He nodded, his movements calm. I'll be fine, Mom. It's time for a fresh start. When the door finally closed, Victor turned to find Juliana still sitting at the table, her face buried in her hands. Victor, she whispered, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. What happens now? What happens now, he said evenly, is that you pack your things. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. This marriage is over. Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. For once, she seemed to understand the gravity of her actions. Victor watched her retreat up the stairs, her sobs echoing faintly. He didn't follow. Instead, he sank into a chair, the weight of the evening finally settling on his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he felt a strange sense of peace. The truth was out. The healing could begin. The house was eerily quiet after the last guest had left. Victor stood in the center of the living room, his arms crossed as he stared at Juliana. She sat on the couch, her makeup smeared and tears running down her face. Victor, please, she said, her voice breaking. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but it doesn't mean I don't love you. We can fix this. I'll do anything. Victor's jaw tightened. You made a choice, Juliana. Over and over again, you chose him. You chose betrayal. Don't stand there and try to convince me it was a mistake. She sobbed, sinking to her knees in front of him. Please, I'll go to therapy. I'll cut him out of my life completely. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't end us like this. Victor stepped back, putting distance between them. And us? You ended us the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. Don't try to rewrite the story now, because the truth came out. A loud knock on the door interrupted them. Victor strode over and opened it to find Marcus standing on the porch, his lips still swollen from earlier. I need to talk to you, Marcus said, his voice low. Victor laughed bitterly. Talk? About what? You've done enough talking, whispering, actually, in this house. Look, I messed up, Marcus began, his hands up in a placating gesture. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but you're damn right you don't, Victor snapped. You think I want to hear some half-assed apology? You betrayed me, Marcus. My own brother. You're not even worth the anger I feel. Juliana stood, her voice desperate. Marcus, just leave. You're only making this worse. Marcus ignored her. Victor, we're family. We've been through so much together. Can we at least try to fix this? Victor stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. We stopped being family the moment you decided to sleep with my wife. Now, get the hell off my property. Marcus hesitated, but the look in Victor's eyes left no room for argument. He turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. As the door slammed shut, Victor turned back to Juliana. You too. Pack your things. Juliana's eyes widened in panic. What? Victor, no. I have nowhere to go. Please, just let me stay. We can work through this. Victor shook his head. You should have thought about that before you destroyed everything. You don't get to stay here and pretend nothing happened. She rushed to him, grabbing his hands. Victor, I'm begging you. Don't do this. I'll change. I'll be the wife you deserve. Please, give me another chance. He pulled his hands away, his expression resolute. You had 10 years of chances. I'm done giving you more. By now, the commotion had drawn attention from the neighbors. Lights flickered on in nearby houses, and curtains were pulled aside as curious eyes peered out into the night. Victor opened the front door and pointed to the street. Out! Juliana froze, her face a mix of disbelief and humiliation. Victor, you can't be serious. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. He stared at her, unyielding. You weren't worried about everyone when you were sneaking around behind my back. Get out. She gathered her purse and coat with trembling hands, her sobs audible with every step. As she stepped outside, neighbors began stepping onto their porches, whispering amongst themselves. What's going on? One neighbor asked. Looks like trouble in paradise, another said, smirking. Juliana turned to Victor one last time. I'll do anything, Victor. Just say the word, and I'll fix this. Victor's voice was calm, but firm. The only thing I want is for you to leave. That's the only fix left. Marcus, who had lingered at the edge of the driveway, walked up to Juliana. Come on, I'll take you somewhere. Don't, Victor called out. Marcus stopped in his tracks, his shoulders tensing. Victor stepped forward, addressing the gathered neighbors without looking at his brother. For anyone curious, my wife and my brother decided to have an affair behind my back. Tonight, they're facing the consequences. The crowd murmured, their whispers growing louder. Marcus turned red, his fists clenching. You didn't have to announce it to the whole neighborhood, Victor. Victor's laugh was sharp. You humiliated me in private. It's only fair the world knows what you really are. Juliana grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him toward his car. Let's just go, she muttered, her face burning with shame. As they drove off, Victor stood in the doorway, watching them disappear into the night. The neighbors began retreating back into their homes, their expressions a mix of curiosity and satisfaction. Inside, the house felt strangely empty. Victor began cleaning up the remnants of the disastrous evening, gathering plates and broken glasses with methodical precision. The silence was almost comforting. His phone buzzed on the counter. A message from his mother popped up. We're here for you, Victor. Stay strong. He stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. Thanks, Mom. I'll be okay. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of peace. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the hardest part was done. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The days following the dramatic confrontation were a blur of conflicting emotions for Victor. Anger, grief, and an odd sense of relief swirled within him as he navigated his new reality. He kept himself busy, filling the silence of his home with the hum of productivity. Victor began each day with a strict routine. Morning runs helped burn away the lingering frustration, each step pounding out his anger. Afterward, he'd shower, dress, and head to work, immersing himself in projects he'd once left on the back burner. One Tuesday evening, Victor found himself sitting across from a therapist, a woman named Dr. Ramirez. Her calm, no-nonsense demeanor made it easier for him to open up. You've been through a significant betrayal, she said, her tone neutral yet empathetic. How are you coping with the emotions, anger, sadness, even guilt? Victor leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. I'm angry, sure. But more than that, I feel free. Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't even know existed. Now that it's gone, I'm just trying to figure out what comes next. Dr. Ramirez nodded. That's normal. Betrayal shakes your sense of trust, not just in others, but in yourself. Rebuilding that trust will take time. As the weeks passed, Victor took her advice to heart. He joined a woodworking class at a local community center, something he'd always been curious about but never pursued. The scent of freshly cut wood and the rhythmic sound of saws became a balm for his frayed nerves. At first, his work was clumsy, uneven cuts, splintered edges, but he found solace in the process. One evening, as he was sanding the edge of a table he'd been working on, the instructor approached. You've got a good eye for detail, the man said, nodding at Victor's work. Victor chuckled. Still learning, but it's nice to build something that doesn't fall apart. It was during one of these classes that he met Amora. She was a petite woman with a bright smile and an easy laugh, her hands already covered in sawdust when she introduced herself. First time here? She asked, glancing at the rough bench Victor was working on. Yeah, Victor replied, wiping his hands on a rag. Try to pick up a new hobby. What about you? Amora's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. Second time. Thought I'd try something different to clear my head. They worked side by side that evening, trading stories about their projects. By the end of the class, Victor found himself looking forward to seeing her again. Over the next few weeks, their friendship grew. They started grabbing coffee after class, talking about everything from favorite movies to the challenges of rebuilding a life after betrayal. One evening, as they sat in a quiet cafe, Amora opened up about her past. My ex-husband, she began, stirring her coffee absently, cheated on me with my best friend. It was devastating at first, but looking back, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Victor raised an eyebrow. The best thing? Amora nodded. It forced me to reevaluate everything, who I was, what I wanted, what I deserved. It wasn't easy, but I came out stronger. Victor considered her words, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I get that. I'm not there yet, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Their connection deepened with each conversation. Amora's warmth and resilience were a beacon for Victor, guiding him out of the darkness he'd been trapped in. One evening, after a particularly long woodworking class, Victor walked Amora to her car. Thanks for tonight, she said, leaning against the door. It's nice to have someone who understands. Victor hesitated for a moment before replying. It is. I didn't think I'd ever trust anyone again, but you make it easy. Amora's cheeks flushed slightly, and she smiled. Well, you're easy to trust too, Victor. The relationship that blossomed between them wasn't rushed. They took their time, allowing each other space to heal. Victor admired Amora's strength and her refusal to let her past define her. Amora, in turn, appreciated Victor's sincerity and the way he was slowly rediscovering joy in the simple things. One weekend, Amora invited Victor to a park where a local arts festival was being held. They strolled through booths of handcrafted goods, pausing to admire intricate pottery and colorful paintings. At one booth, Victor picked up a small wooden figurine of a bird, its wings spread as if in flight. It reminds me of you, Amora said, smiling softly. Me? Victor asked, tilting his head. She nodded. You're like this bird, broken once maybe, but still capable of soaring. Victor looked at her, the weight of her words settling over him. You make me feel like I can. Amora took his hand, her grip firm yet gentle. That's because you can. In time, Victor realized that his pain, while still present, no longer defined him. The betrayal that had once consumed him had become a stepping stone to a new life, a life filled with purpose, creativity, and the possibility of love. Sitting on his porch one evening, watching the sunset, Victor felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Amora's laughter echoed in his mind, a reminder that even in the face of heartbreak, there was always hope for a brighter tomorrow. The soft morning light filtered through the windows of Victor's new home, illuminating the cozy living room. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint aroma of sawdust from the workshop in the backyard. Victor stood by the mantel, running his fingers over the smooth surface of a handcrafted wooden frame that displayed a photo of him and Amora from their honeymoon in the mountains. "Admiring your work again?" Amora's voice rang out playfully as she entered the room, a steaming mug in each hand. Victor turned, smiling as he took one of the mugs. "Just appreciating how far we've come. Feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it?" Amora nodded, setting her mug down on the coffee table. "It does, but I think that's the beauty of it. Every piece of the journey brought us here." Victor's journey to this peaceful morning had been anything but easy. Years had passed since the betrayal that shattered his old life. The anger and pain had dulled over time, replaced by a sense of gratitude for the lessons learned. Therapy had helped him confront the depths of his emotions, but it was his growing relationship with Amora that truly healed him. They'd moved into this house 2 years ago, a quaint but spacious property just outside the city. The backyard was Victor's haven, where he spent countless hours crafting furniture and art pieces in a workshop he had built himself. It was a far cry from the corporate grind he'd once been consumed by. Later that afternoon, Victor and Amora worked together in the garden, planting a new row of vegetables. Amora wiped her forehead, glancing at Victor as he carefully placed each seed in the soil. "You've got that focus again," she teased. "I swear, you could plant an entire forest and still make sure every tree was perfectly aligned." Victor chuckled, leaning back on his heels. "It's the woodworking rubbing off on me. Precision is everything." Amora handed him a watering can. "Well, your precision is why we have the best-looking garden in the neighborhood." Victor grinned, shaking his head. "You're biased, but I'll take the compliment." As the sun began to set, they sat on the porch swing, sipping lemonade and watching the colors streak across the sky. "Do you ever think about them?" Amora asked softly, not looking at him. Victor was silent for a moment, staring into the distance. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not out of anger anymore, though. It's more like they're a cautionary tale, a reminder of what not to let into my life again." Amora leaned her head on his shoulder. "You've come so far, Victor. It's inspiring, honestly. Most people would have let something like that destroy them." "It almost did," he said quietly. "But then I realized I didn't want to be defined by their choices. I wanted to be better, to live better." News of Juliana and Marcus occasionally trickled in from mutual acquaintances. Marcus, once so smug and confident, had bounced between jobs and was now living in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. Juliana, estranged from both her family and Marcus, worked as a cashier at a small grocery store. Amora, ever the empathetic soul, had asked Victor once if he felt sorry for them. "Not really," Victor had replied at the time. "They made their choices. Now they're living with the consequences. I've got my own life to focus on." Victor's woodworking business had become a surprising success. What started as a hobby had grown into a full-fledged operation, with commissions coming in from across the state. Amora handled the marketing and customer communication, while Victor focused on creating. One evening, as Victor sanded the edges of a custom dining table, Amora entered the workshop, holding her phone. "You've got another glowing review," she said, smiling. "Mrs. Hargrove loves the bookshelf. She says it's her favorite piece in the house." Victor set down the sander and wiped his hands on his apron. "That's good to hear." She was pretty particular about the design. Amora wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You always deliver. That's what makes you so good at this and everything else." Victor turned to face her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You've been my anchor through it all." Amora kissed him gently. "And you've been mine." On a crisp fall morning, Victor received an unexpected letter. The handwriting was familiar, though shaky and uneven. It was from Juliana. Amora noticed the change in Victor's demeanor as he read it. "Is everything okay?" she asked, concerned. "It's from Juliana," he said, handing her the letter. Amora read it silently. Juliana had written a heartfelt apology, admitting to the pain she caused and expressing regret for everything. She didn't ask for forgiveness, only for a chance to clear her conscience. "What do you think?" Amora asked, watching Victor closely. Victor shrugged. "I don't feel much, to be honest. I've already forgiven her in my own way, not for her sake, but for mine. I don't need anything more from her." Amora nodded. That's a healthy way to look at it. Closure doesn't always come from the other person, does it? Victor smiled faintly. No, it doesn't. I found mine a long time ago. That evening, they hosted friends for dinner, their laughter filling the house. As Victor watched Amora chatting animatedly with a guest, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. When the evening wound down and the guests had left, Victor and Amora sat on the porch again, the quiet of the night wrapping around them. Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it? Victor said, his tone thoughtful. Amora squeezed his hand. It does, especially when you refuse to let the past define you. Victor looked at her, his heart full. I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again. But with you, it feels like I found everything I was missing. Amora leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. That's because you were open to it, Victor. You let yourself heal. And now, we've got the rest of our lives to keep building something beautiful. As they sat there, the stars twinkling above them, Victor felt the weight of his past finally lift. He had risen from the ashes of betrayal, not just surviving, but thriving. And for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace.